So, good morning everybody on the third day of FabrianoInAcquarello 2022 in Bologna, and it is a great pleasure to be here today with the Fabriano Paper Factory, and they are, as told in the past days many times, they are our main supporters since many years, but by 2022 they have become exclusive supporter for as paper brand, sorry. And it is a pleasure to be here again with Keiko Tanabe and Giuseppe Prezioso and Davide Siddi. All of them are very welcome, and you already know all of them since many years. Keiko is going to do a great demo later on, and Giuseppe and Davide are going to explain us about the beautiful artistico paper and all the other paper that we can use to build our artistic job on the Fabriano paper. The Fabriano artistico paper is only one of the many, and Giuseppe is going to give you this information and focus on it. Thank you, Giuseppe, and very welcome.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you to be here. So I'm Giuseppe Prezioso, and so I'm working Fabriano since more than 22 years, but it seems less because I seem younger, I think, I hope. So today we'll talk about paper history a little bit. So because it's early morning, so you are well awake, so you will not fall asleep, because if you do it in the afternoon, you start snoring after 5 minutes. But just to give you an idea why Fabriano is so important in the paper market and the paper history. And the idea is to show this little part of history, and later on we will show the 3 different ways of producing paper that we still have in Fabriano. So Fabriano is, I think, the only industry still producing the paper in 3 different ways: handmade, mold-made, and for linear-made. And we are very proud of this. So before each video, thanks to Davide, he's a wonderful artist, but he's a friend, so we will show some features, some characteristics. So the surface grain, the reaction of the paper according to the different production processes, and how the paper reacts on wet, wet on dry, and so on, in order to show the differences that you can find linked to the production process. So first we will see the paper, how it reacts, and later on we see through the videos how these features are given to the paper. So in order to give you more information, or the best information about the paper, so when you use it, you see, that's the reaction, because during production this thing is done and so on, and that reflects on the paper that you are using. So let's start now with the presentation. So I ask to have the PowerPoint okay. So now I take the lead. I can move the slides. So as you know, or probably you already know, paper has been invented in China 2,000 years ago, more or less. So we say normally that the paper has been invented by Tsai Lun. It's not completely true, because this was an employee of the emperor who made the formalization of how the paper was made at the time. It means that the paper was at the beginning, as it is today, a mix of vegetal fibers that are smashed and combined together in order to form a sheet of paper through filtration. So filtration is a term meaning the way the fibers bond together. At that time and now is the same expression that we use. From China, so the paper moved backward from Asia through the Silk Road and arrived in Europe, passing through the Arabic countries. So you can see through this chart, it has arrived in Europe through Spain and arrived in Italy as well. So I don't know if, Pierre, you agree, we have seen a similar presentation in the US where made a competitor doing a great job showing the same historical path, but he was only saying that the paper arrived in Europe through Spain and not passing through Fabriano. So he didn't say that the paper didn't arrive at Fabriano, but omitted that part. And not because I'm from Fabriano, I work for Fabriano since many years, but Fabriano has had a very important role in the paper. So the paper that we use, you use more than me today, is because 8 centuries ago in Fabriano, something very important happened. So let's see the characteristic of the Arab paper. So it was quite good as a paper at the time. Was the important thing to say that was sized, so treated on the surface in order to be apt to writing with wheat starch or rice starch. So that was very good to give a sizing on the surface. But when this paper arrived in Europe, it was easily attacked by the bacteria or the microbes that were available, were present in Europe because of more humid environment. So the paper was destroyed in a very short while of time. And that's the reason why paper was a poor product. So it was forbidden to be used for official documents. So it doesn't move. I don't know why it doesn't go on. Okay, it works. So just to make an introduction, 3 innovations in the Middle Ages happened in Fabriano. So the surface sizing of the paper with animal gelatin, the invention of the hydraulic hammer mill, and the watermark of the paper sheet. So this is the 3 main inventions, more or less happened at the same time. We are around the 13th century. So we have seen that the surface sizing was the main issue related to paper longevity over the years. So what happened is that mixing the paper that has been arrived in Fabriano for, I don't know, there are several legends about it. Probably some Arab prisoners were moved to Fabriano. Today, Fabriano is a nice place, but probably at the time it was a very, very bad place. So all the prisoners were moved there in order to give bigger punishment to them. So I'm joking, of course. And so in Fabriano, there were a lot of different activities. It was a very industrious town. And one of them was the leather production, so the parchment, or the leather used for clothes and so on. So for doing this kind of products, you might boil the skin of the animals. So I know it's not a good image, but that's what was happening at the time. So the gelatin was a waste, a byproduct of this process, was thrown away, probably by chance or just making a trial, putting the paper into this animal gelatin. They've seen that the paper was completely new. I mean, the paper was very good for writing and mostly was lasting over time. Probably because this gelatin was boiled, so was sterilized, and so it was not possible to be attacked by the bacteria present in the environment. So the paper had a new life. It means that now the paper could be used for official documents, was less expensive than parchment, and so the consumption of paper increased in a very, very fast way. Increasing the production, you need more raw materials. So the raw material at the time and until the beginning of the last century were rags. So it means that paper industries has been always sustainable, let's say, because a circular economy. So at the time, the raw materials were used clothes, not possible anymore to be used by the people. So there were people going house by house in order to collect the clothes and bring them to the different mills in order to produce paper. So they invented the hydraulic hammer mill. So this is a mortar, is a battery of mortars. So the Arab mortar was just one mill this is a battery moving in an asynchronic way, so through the energy given by the river. So in this way, it could be possible to have a huge quantity of raw material with an homogeneous quality and to have a better or a very good quality of paper. Over the time, so the quality of the Fabriano paper was the most important one, so the most requested on the market. So in the surrounding areas of the central Italy, other artisans started to produce the paper, claiming that it was Fabriano paper, because that was paying the higher price. So that's the third invention, so the watermarking of a single sheet of paper. So the watermark, as probably you know, is a sign embedded into the paper. And at the beginning, probably the invention has been because the mold for producing the paper was broken. So, you know, the mold at the time was a laid mold, like this one, you see, this line, horizontal and vertical. That's the mold, that's the pattern of the mold used for draining out the water. And they reflect on the finished sheet of paper in these laid lines. This is a watermark. So probably the mold was broken, one thread was broken. So at the end, you had a sheet of paper with this mark, undesired mark. So somebody said, okay, this is a flaw, but I can exploit it in order to write something into the paper. So it started to have the signing of the paper. As you can see, the first signs were a star or some religious signs. And that was the trademark. So, because this technique was known all in Fabriano, and each artisan was having his own watermark in order to make its own paper recognizable by the market, let's say. And nowadays, this is still a security feature. I mean, in banknotes, you still have the watermark, because the watermark is not possible to be reproduced in any way, with printing or with photocopying and so on. So this invention is the signature into the paper. You still have it in the fine arts papers as a sign of recognition and genuinity, a warranty of the origin of the paper. Over the years, in Fabriano, this technique had an evolution in order to reproduce paintings or statues or whatever you want through the watermark. So the watermark, just to make it simple, it's a difference of thickness in paper. And with a backlight, you have a difference in the ray lights that can pass through. When you have a thicker paper, less light can pass through, so you have a dark. And when you have a thinner layer of paper, you have a lighter mark. So combining this effect in a very thin sheet of paper, you can reproduce this chiaroscuro effect in a wonderful way. So we are very proud of this because we're still able to do it in our company. It's a very complex process, but this is just to show what you can do with the paper. So just here, I'm showing the different slides, showing that we have an handmade department, a mold-made department where we produce, I hope, the paper that you use for watercolor. And for DNA machine, this is the biggest one that we have in the very same plant, because if you come to Fabriano, you are able to visit the paper mill, you can see the three different ways of producing paper in one building, in one factory. And here we can see people using the Fabriano paper over the years. And we can say that thanks to the watermark, because if we can find some writings or some drawing made on paper with a watermark, through the watermark you can know the origin of the paper. So you can find all this information in our website. So just to say that in the past, so there were long correspondence between Bodoni, for instance, and the Miliani family, that at the time were owning the paper mill. And inside our archive, we have the letters that were exchanged between the customer and the company. For instance, Francesco Rosaspina was an engraver, and Rosaspina is the name of our print-making paper that we have in our catalog. So, and we hope in the future to have your name as well there. But you have first to die. Yeah? When you die, you can be on the Pantheon. So take your time. So this is just the presentation. And now we go on in order to show the 3 different ways of producing paper. But first we have Davide showing through his ability and his brush the paper. Okay, thank you.
Tanto, buongiorno a tutti, sono Davide Siddi, sono un pittore figurativo che lavora ormai da una decina d'anni con le carte della Fabriano. Quello che vi propongo oggi non è un dipinto vero e proprio, ma sono proprio dei piccoli test per vedere i differenti effetti che le carte restituiscono in base poi anche ai processi di produzione che vedremo successivamente.
Sì, Davide is here just to show through some simple tests the different features of the paper, starting with different qualities. When I mean qualities, so the quality of the paper is given by the combination of the production process and the fibers used for producing the paper. So we can say that handmade or mold-made papers made of 100% cotton is the highest quality. When we move to for machine-made or Fourdrinier-made papers, we have less cotton content in the paper and a different quality. So it's always a good quality. All the papers are good. It depends on the goal that you are looking for. So on the effects, or you're doing some sketches, or you cannot afford to have an expensive paper. So now we start with Esportazione.
Sì.
So Esportazione is our watercolor paper handmade. So Esportazione means export. So this paper was at the beginning, I made some research in our archive, only for export. That's the reason why it's called in this way. At the beginning it was named English type, tipo inglese, because it was only available for the export. It was in the imperial size. Imperial size is 22 by 30 inches, that we translate in Europe as 56 by 76. So this is, let's say, our testimonial, because it's handmade, so as the soul of Fabriano in this paper, because it's still the only one using animal gelatin for the surface sizing, because we want to keep our tradition alive, so because the animal gelatin sizing has been invented in Fabriano, but we still use it only for handmade paper. For the rest of the production, we use different sizing agents. So, please go.
Però intanto in genere quando provo le carte per valutare la diversa resa, sia in termini di asciugatura che poi anche di gestione dell'acqua sul foglio, parto sempre da alcune prove di bagnato su bagnato, quindi quel tipo di tecnica che permette di capire anche come il colore si muove su diverse tipologie di carta in base alla quantità di acqua che viene messa. Questo permette di valutare anche il tipo di effetto che poi un acquerello molto diluito restituisce.
So David is saying that when he starts to test a paper or to make a drawing, is a wet-on-wet technique. So in order to see how the paper reacts and how he can adapt this technique to the paper.
Quindi chiaramente anche un tipo di tecnica che poi restituisce, un tipo di test che restituisce proprio effetti differenti anche di granulazione del colore in base alla texture stessa della carta.
So in this way you can see the reaction of the technique and how you can apply the technique to the reaction of the paper. So in this case, so you think, you feel, let's say in this way, that this handmade paper has a peculiar reaction. Questa carta che è fatta a mano ti dà delle sensazioni
diverse.
Beh,
la prima cosa devo dire, come avrete capito, io non parlo inglese, mi sembra evidente.
No, we didn't perceive it. So.
La prima cosa sicuramente, diciamo, la prima volta che ho provato questa carta, soprattutto dopo aver visto i mastri cartai all'opera, la cosa che più colpisce forse è una cosa più romantica che tecnica, oltre a sicuramente quelle tecniche, ma il fatto di lavorare su una carta che viene prodotta così da secoli. Quindi l'idea di ritrovarsi un po' a lavorare con un foglio veramente tradizionale, fatto apposta per gli artisti, sembrano fatti uno a uno, sembra proprio che quel foglio venga fatto poi per me che lo sto utilizzando. Questo è sicuramente la prima impressione emotiva.
So
diciamo.
there is an emotional side, so a feeling, because you are using and handmade paper, so he has seen the production, so he sees that it's a real handmade paper because he's seen that the people working around this sheet of paper he's using have touched this paper many, many times. So it's like a connection, intellectual connection that gives more feeling with the paper and with the technique.
Poi dal punto di vista tecnico sicuramente sono interessanti sia i tempi di asciugatura che restituisce a questa carta, che non sono sempre perfettamente omogenei e che quindi favoriscono per esempio anche dei movimenti del colore tipo questi, che poi restituiscono le macchie tipiche dell'acquerello, l'effetto di vibrazione che si può ottenere per esempio in un cielo nuvoloso, adesso parlando di paesaggio banalmente.
So it's the effect that it gives is the vibrancy of the colors and the movements that sometimes are not so easy to control because at the end each sheet of paper is different from the others, and so it's not so easy to master the reaction.
Adesso inclino un po', si vedeva la parte bagnata. L'altra differenza sicuramente è nelle parti un po' più secche, che sono quelle che si vedono qua e che possiamo anche evidenziare lavorando con un pennello con poco serbatoio, che ci restituisce proprio la texture della carta stessa.
So if you use less water in your brush, so you see the texture of the paper coming out more evident.
La differenza principale tra una carta fatta a mano come questa e le altre carte, che poi vedremo successivamente, sta nel segno che si forma lungo il bordo della pennellata, che risulta leggermente più morbido, mi viene da dire, non saprei come altro descriverlo.
He says that when you have the brush stroke, so the edge of the brush stroke is softer, is gentler compared to other papers, so it's a different reaction and expression of the brush stroke.
Quindi principalmente gli effetti interessanti che ho da subito apprezzato di questa carta sono appunto gli effetti che si formano in fase di asciugatura e lavorando col bagnato su bagnato. Io generalmente faccio paesaggio e mi capita spesso di lavorare prima col bagnato su bagnato. Mi fermo.
So it starts usually working with wet on wet.
E poi successivamente lavoro con successivi passaggi di bagnato su asciutto.
And after he works applying different layers of wet on dry, so in order to give more, I don't know, 3D effect, so effetto tridimensionale.
Esatto, sì, è molto realistico in genere. Mi piace poi come si uniscono questi due passaggi, quindi il primo passaggio di bagnato su bagnato che dà delle sfumature molto morbide, molto tenui.
Yes, because the wet on wet gives very soft shades, so it's gentler compared to the wet on dry where you have rougher, let's say, effects.
E poi successivamente, continuando a lavorare con le velature, un colore che per sovrapposizione diventa sempre più denso, sempre più coprente, fino ad arrivare al colore quasi puro del mezzo godet. Quindi ottenere comunque dei colori estremamente pittorici che danno molta profondità al dipinto.
So, and after, with the wet and dry, so applying different layers, so to arrive to a very deep color in order to give a depth to the color, so in order to give this difference of shades and to combine the effects. Okay, I think we can go on now with the video, showing how this paper that Davide has just showed to us, how it is produced, so we can... Possiamo partire con il video della carta a mano. Ok. So in this video you will see the full process. So every time you start to produce the paper, you have to combine water and fibers. So water is very important for produce the paper. And the fibers, in this case we are talking about cotton fibers, the longest available fibers for producing papers. In this case, we don't use anymore the hammer mill, the hydraulic hammer mill, but we have the Holland beater. So in this vat, we have a wheel with some teeth on the surface, and this grinds the paper, the fibers in order to have the fibers open and shortened. And here we have the mold. Here you see the laid mold, so the most ancient one. So through this mold, you can drain out the water from the sheet of paper. So the mold is composed of two sides, the mold and the frame. The frame is the outer part, that gives the shape of the sheet of paper and the weight. So according to the height of the edge, you can vary the weight of the paper. As you can see, it seems easy to be done, but it's very complicated because it's very heavy and you have to master the mold in order to have a very even surface of the sheet of paper. After, he gives the mold to the workers. One is called the coucher and the other one is the worker helping him to move it. So in this case, they apply with a gentle pressure the mold onto the felt. The felt has two functions: to detach, to separate the paper from the surface of the mold, and to give the surface grain. What Davide was showing is a cold press surface, is given by that felt. So the felt has knots on the surface. The paper being very wet is receiving as a mirror the pattern that you have on the surface of the felt. When you have completed the pile of felts, that's like a sandwich, so paper and felts, you have to squeeze out the water. So we have this press, that is, in this case, the floor is going up, squeezing against the ceiling this pile, and so you see how much water comes out. So now we have 40% water. Now the paper has enough strength to be separated by the felt. So they do this operation. You see how many times each sheet is handled. So very careful, but very carefully, because at each stage you can spoil the paper. You have to throw it away. You can see in this case, the 4 decal edges. You can have it only with handmade paper. You can have it in the molded cylinder-made papers, but that's, let's say, a fake, because you have to tear the paper in order to recreate the 4 decals. Now the paper has to be dried, has to be made very dried, because for 2 reasons, of course. One, because the papers are usually sized twice in the mass, and nowadays, in order to have the sizing in the mass working, you need to have a very high temperature, more than 100 degrees Celsius, in order to be this sizing activated. On the other side, you need a very dry paper for the surface sizing, so it makes the paper very absorbent, and you see this kind of sizing is very strong because the paper is moving very slowly through these felts to keep it flat. And this is a bath, a tub sizing, and it gets a lot of glue, a lot of sizing on the surface. That's the reason why this kind of paper has beautiful sizing. So the sizing gets into the paper, into the fibers, and it reacts perfectly, very balanced reaction to watercolor, to wet techniques. In this case, we are producing, you see, Roma paper. That's a pastel paper, a very nice, beautiful paper with a perfect reaction to pastel with wonderful effects. And after the surface sizing, the paper is wet once again, and we dry it at the air. So in order to save space, in the past, they invented this machine with these shelves. We place the paper on the surface. It moves back and forth in this room in order to be dried at the air, because in this way we can save space, because in the past the sheets were hung to the ropes, but it was needed a lot of space to do it. And at the end, but it's not done in this way anymore, but just to show, in the past, the weight of the paper was given through this balance, that was giving the weight of the paper by reams. Pierre yesterday was saying the difference between GSM, so grams per square meter, and pounds. So the pounds are quite difficult to be translated. Sometimes grams per square meter are difficult to be translated into pounds, because in this case, when we talk about 300 GSM, is 140 pounds. That means a ream of paper in 300 GSM has a weight of 140 pounds. So but it's difficult for other papers. For watercolor, it's quite easy, but for other papers, it's more difficult because you need to know the size of the paper to be used for the measurement. So there's to give an information about the differences from Europe and the Anglo-Saxon standards. Now, Davide is coming back in order to show the effects on artistico paper, in this case, with the different surfaces.
Intanto ne approfitto, vi faccio vedere, adesso che inizia ad asciugare, i diversi effetti di cui parlavo prima, quindi queste macchie che si vanno a formare qua. Logicamente molti effetti li vediamo poi quando la carta è completamente asciutta, poi magari...
So he's saying that now that the paper is drying, you can see the effects that Davide was describing before. So Davide, now you have, starting from your left,
Con carta satinata,
so hot press,
carta fine e carta grossa, grana fine e grana grossa.
grana fina in English,
Je ne sais pas.
cold press and rough.
Diciamo che queste tre differenze, quindi la satinata, la fine e la grossa, sono secondo me le prime cose che valuta un artista che inizia a dipingere. Quindi che tipo di superficie devo utilizzare, che tipo di carta devo acquistare per il tipo di pittura che voglio.
So the first evaluation that an artist starts, when starts to paint, is to see the different surfaces, different grains, and to find which one is better for his technique.
E la differenza chiaramente sta poi anche nella resa che i diversi dipinti poi restituiscono in base alla superficie su cui si lavora.
So one surface, one effect from the painting, so it's important to have the good selection.
Io quello che pensavo di proporvi, di farvi vedere, è una prova tipo quella che ho fatto prima, quindi vedere diversi effetti di bagnato su bagnato e di lavoro a secco o colore più denso sulle tre diverse tipologie.
So now that we have three surfaces available, to do the same exercise of before, showing the differences in the effects according to the different surface grains.
E prima di iniziare, piccolo appunto, noterete che la carta centrale è più chiara rispetto all'altra, perché una, provo a dirlo con la pronuncia giusta, parliamo di carte traditional white e extra white, quindi carte più o meno tendenti al bianco.
Yes, he's saying that the paper in the middle is whiter because it's the artistico extra white. So we have, as you probably I hope you know, in artistico we have two different shades, both without OBA, without optical brighteners. So the traditional white is traditional because it's closer to the European standards with an off-white color. So the extra white is been developed in the past. There is a long history to be told about it. It's more for US market, Japanese market, so with a different shade of white. So that's the natural white of the cotton, but we have a special selection, a special blend in order to get this white, this pure white. But I want to underline that there are no optical brighteners in the artistico papers.
Quindi come prima, la prima prova che vi propongo è quella legata al bagnato su bagnato. Quindi si bagna con acqua pulita il foglio, ma qua siamo più o meno tutti acquerellisti o comunque appassionati, quindi...
You will get a note at the end, so sarai giudicato alla fine.
Sarò giudicato, ma per alzata di mano?
Sì, come no.
Il passaggio è sempre lo stesso, quindi logicamente si bagna il foglio e si interviene poi con colori più o meno densi, più o meno carichi. In base alla quantità di acqua che abbiamo messo avremo un colore che tende a galleggiare e muoversi, potremmo dire in qualche modo, o a stare più vicino al punto in cui l'abbiamo messo.
Probabilmente è interessante vedere se tu fai in sequenza sulle tre superfici.
Sì.
So I think I was saying to Davide it's important to show the effect made at the same time on the three different surfaces in order to see the difference on reaction or on the effect.
Provo a spostarlo in modo da non darvi il riflesso, ma mi sa che un minimo c'è, però penso si veda poi l'effetto finale. Questo a mio avviso è il tipo di pittura, il bagnato su bagnato, che maggiormente restituisce quella che è la grana, poi la texture proprio della carta.
C'è una prima differenza è quindi che fra il satinato e la grana fina fluisce in maniera differente.
Esatto, e cambiano poi, lo vediamo anche adesso su questo, gli effetti poi di granulazione di colore, ovvero comunque il colore che si sedimenta sulla parte concava della carta. Chiaramente
So
essendo...
you can see the difference between the hot press and the cold press, how the color is moving on the surface of the paper. I don't know how to translate granulazione.
Granulazione.
Granulation, I don't think is the right translation, but... So the difference on the surface grains, so grana grossa and grana fina, cold press and rough, is given by the different felt. And the hot press, we will see later in the video, is given at the end of the machine, or the machine production. So in UK, if I'm not wrong, so the cold press surface is called not. It means not hot pressed, in order to underline the difference between the two different ways of giving the surface on a sheet of paper.
Le differenze principali poi sono interessanti anche per valutare il tipo di dipinto che vogliamo fare. Quindi per esempio se stiamo cercando degli effetti particolari di macchie che si formano con differenti tempi di asciugature, vediamo che sulla satinata per esempio abbiamo le parti con più acqua che tendono proprio a macchiarsi rispetto alle parti più secche, più asciutte.
So on the hot press surface you see the difference according to how much water and pigment stays on one particular spot, and so you have a different of depth in the color.
Mentre invece sull'artistico, sulla grana fina abbiamo degli effetti sicuramente molto più morbidi, che da un lato permettono di evidenziare delle sfumature anche abbastanza graduali, soprattutto col bagnato su bagnato, e quando creano delle macchie, sono delle macchie che poi hanno la tipica, le chiamo macchia a stella, non so se si chiamino così, però come si vede in questa parte qua, delle parti in cui l'acqua spinge sul colore.
So you see the peculiar effects, typical effects of the watercolor on cold press surface, where the colors is moving like a star effect, so moving in all the different directions.
Mentre invece sulla grana grossa sicuramente abbiamo delle macchie che sono più evidenti, soprattutto nella parte in cui viene poi valorizzata la grana, specialmente se poi noi interveniamo ulteriormente con altri passaggi. Richiamiamo quelle che sono le tipiche macchie appunto a stella, le chiamo io, che chiaramente cammineranno seguendo le fibre e soprattutto la texture della carta, quindi restituiranno, sto andando troppo?
Yes, no, according to the different surfaces, so you can have the different effect according to the roughness of the surface, so you can get the effect that you want according to your needs, your desires.
Quindi quello che vediamo è sicuramente che con interventi anche di questo tipo vediamo che la macchia tende a camminare diramando in qualche modo il colore, facendo in modo che il colore si apra un po' di più, mentre invece man mano che andiamo sulle carte più fini diventa una macchia più controllabile, un pochino più circoscritta. E questo chiaramente poi va a influire sul tipo di carta che andrò a scegliere in funzione del dipinto che devo fare. Se devo fare un paesaggio particolare con degli alberi, andrò magari a scegliere una grana grossa che permette queste macchie qua.
Yes, it depends on the final result. It was saying that if I need to make a landscape with some trees, I will choose a paper with a rough surface in order to have an effect that I desire to have to reproduce a tree.
Un altro passaggio che vi vorrei mostrare è legato a una pennellata a secco, un po' quella che abbiamo visto prima. Quindi qui vediamo come lavorando con tanta acqua il colore, asciugandosi, poi in qualche modo restituisca la superficie e la texture della carta stessa. Un effetto simile poi lo otteniamo lavorando a secco. Qui otteniamo un effetto differente rispetto al primo, nel senso che nel bagnato su bagnato abbiamo il colore che si sedimenta sulla parte concava della carta e quindi ci fa vedere quella che è la parte, potremmo dire, più interna del foglio. Lavorando così, col pennello secco e poca acqua, il colore rimane solo in superficie.
Yes, when you have this wet on dry brush stroke, you see that the surface grain comes out more evidently. And so on this hot press, you have a more homogeneous brush stroke. On the others, you have to work more because the colors comes on the top of the grain, and you have a sedimentation in the deeper parts of the grain. So you have this combination of different effects that at the end gives different effects according to the light and different reflection to the light. So on the hot press paper, you have, let's say, a flatter effect because the surface is so even. You don't have these differences in colors.
Anche in questo caso chiaramente la scelta della carta in funzione del soggetto è molto utile, perché per esempio se devo realizzare un paesaggio, non so se si sente? Se devo realizzare un paesaggio per esempio con delle rocce o con delle superfici ruvide, è chiaro che una carta tipo questa mi può avvantaggiare, invece che stare lì con la punta del pennello a fare tutti i dettagli, sfrutto la carta per avere un effetto che sia il più simile possibile al mio soggetto.
So you have to paint a rock, for instance, a rough or a cold press surface. It's more helpful to give the effect of the rock instead of a hot press paper where you can have more detailed paintings.
Mentre invece su carta è chiaramente il stesso discorso per la grana grossa in base al soggetto che devo fare. Con effetti di questo tipo invece viene più difficile immaginare magari la resa di una roccia, ma più semplice. Provate a immaginare una spiaggia con una parte umida bagnata dall'acqua o degli effetti sul mare. È chiaro che delle macchie così più piccole, in base al tipo di soggetto che sto affrontando, mi permettono di risolvere il soggetto più velocemente, semplicemente sfruttando le potenzialità della carta.
So it was underlined the fact that according to what you want to paint, you have to make the right selection of the paper because the paper allows you to have some effects. And so the selection of the paper is very important to the final effect that you want to realize. Okay. Now we are going to see how this paper, as we did for Esportazione, is produced on the mold cylinder machine. So the mold cylinder machine, we can start with the second video. The mold cylinder machine is very important because as the combination of the same features of a handmade papers, but made in an industrial way. It means that we can keep more or less the same features, but in an industrial way. It means that you can have a more homogeneous quality and higher quantity produced in the machine compared to handmade paper. So the beginning of the process is the same. I mean, the ingredients are the same, water and cotton. You can see here the raw cotton that is mixed with water. In this case, we don't have an Holland beater, we have refiners. First, we have the pulper. The pulper is like a big silos with an helix at the bottom, and we start to mix, like a mixer when you do a cake. So we mix the fibers and the water together, as we are seeing now. And after that, we have different processes for refining the paper. Refining means, I repeat, shortening the fibers, but mostly opening the fibers. The fibers at the beginning like this. I'm this way because in this way I have some belly that is not the real shape of the fibers, are opened. So an open fiber is like that. It allows to have arms on the fibers so they bond together in an easier way. So the bond between the fiber is mechanical and chemical. And the chemical bond is given by the water. This is the mold. The mold now is a cylinder with an inner part that's empty, so there is a vacuum. Now it's the same mold that we have for handmade paper, but it's three-dimensional. So the wire, the screen, is wrapped around a cylinder, because now we are producing a web of paper. It's not a production by the sheet, as we have for the handmade paper. We combine in the vat the mold cylinder and the pulp. You can see that the paper now is starting to be formed because the vacuum part in the inner part of the cylinder creates a difference of pressure between the inner part and the outer part. The water can fill through the surface, the pulp, the fibers remain on the surface, and you have paper formation around the cylinder, and the grammage is given by the speed of the machine. This is the coucher felt, the same name of the worker pressing the mold onto the felt. So it's the same operation. So just by contact, it takes out the paper web, and bring it into the machine. And now you have to take out the water. So the paper is gently pressed through some felts in order to take out water, and the last press can give the surface grain that you have seen. So we have more felts compared, let's say, to handmade paper, but the logic, the process is always the same. When we produce, just to give you an idea, 300 GSM paper, the machine runs at 25 meters per minute. When we do 640 GSM, the machine is running at 7 meters per minute. So the machine seems not moving at all. And so that's the reason why this kind of paper is very similar to the handmade paper, because the grain direction, we will talk about it later, is not so evident. So the paper has a reaction very balanced to water. We dry the paper in the same way as we did for the handmade paper, through a battery of cylinders heated with steam. And after, we have the surface sizing. The surface sizing is done exactly in the very same way the sizing is done in the handmade paper. So I'm underlining these two steps. So paper formation, very similar to handmade paper. Sizing is exactly the same. That's the reason why mold-made papers are so similar to handmade papers. We can consider them so like mostly artisanal papers. And after the paper has been sized on the surface, we dry it again through a shorter battery of heated cylinders. And after that, the paper is almost done, so it gives through the machine. And we will see that just at the end, we can give the hot press surface. So the hot press surface, it means that at the beginning, we have neutral felts, so we don't give any surface grain. And at the end, we have cylinders, very smooth on the surface, heated through a specific oil. So the cylinders is very hot. It's like an iron when you have to iron your clothes. So the fibers are softened, and through the pressure, you have a very smooth surface. So in this way, you can realize the hot press surface, specifically in this section. And after that, so you have reels of paper at the end of the machine. So you can see the real decals on the long sides of the reel. If you want to get the 4 decals, as you're used to see in Artistico, for instance, or other papers, you have to tear the paper by hand. Usually we do it creating a water line along the surface of the paper, and after we trim the paper off machine in order to get the four decals. So this is the reel at the end of the machine. And after that, you have the controls in the lab in order to check if all the quality respects the standard and so on. So now we are going to show the last paper, so I mean the machine-made or Fourdinier-made paper, in order to see the same effects that we have seen for handmade and mold-made papers on a paper produced on a different machine.
Chiaramente le prove che vi propongo sono le stesse che abbiamo visto prima, proprio per valutare le differenti carte con una stessa esecuzione. Quindi partiamo da un effetto di bagnato su bagnato. Un attimo, adesso dobbiamo
passiamo le riprese.
Stavo già.
So in this case, we are going to see just 2 papers, because for Fourdinier-made papers, we have, yes, hot press, but usually for this kind of papers, we have the cold press surface that is mostly used by students or to do sketches. Now, Davide is going to show the cold press surface, and I think the torsion as well, or I don't know. Both.
Okay.
Quanto è brutta la vecchiaia. Yes. torsion and watercolor. You have watercolor as well? Grana fine.
No, ho scritto artistico, ma è lei. Ho sbagliato.
Okay, there was a misunderstanding between us. So now we're going just to show a cold press machine made, and on the same machine we are going to show another grain, let's say, called torsion. It's not a real grain because this surface is not given by a felt, but it's like a paper not done properly. So we have an uneven aggregation, accumulation of the fibers, so it's a flocculation that reflects on a cloudy surface of the paper.
Non era artistico, l'ho sbagliato.
No, because I was misunderstood because I was reading artistico and I said, no, you have to use another paper, but...
Il bello degli artisti è che sono anche un po' disordinati, casino.
Sì,
No,
because you feel so artista that you want always to be artistico.
Esatto. Quindi, come diceva Giuseppe, è una carta che ha dei diversi tempi di asciugatura, essendo diversa la composizione, che da quello che mi sembra di aver capito...
Yes, this paper is different from the others because of the machine and because of the fiber content of the fiber mix. This is a blend of cotton and cellulose. So the machine production runs at a speed of 90 meters or 100 meters per...
Parliamo quindi di tempi di asciugatura differenti.
Se puoi scrivere che tipo di carta è watercolor.
Sì, certo.
Grazie. So in this case you have a paper, you can talk about grain direction. I don't know whether you are familiar with this term, but the grain direction is given by the speed of the machine. It means the fibers follow the machine direction. So in this case, the machine runs at 90, 100 meters per minute, so you have the fibers only in one direction, or mostly in one direction. That reflects when you use a lot of water on the buckling of the paper. So, and the sizing is different, so you have a different reaction. That's the purpose of us, so for the production, because you need to provide a different paper compared to artistico, for instance. So with different features, with different characteristics, a different price.
È chiaramente un movimento anche differente delle macchie che poi seguono appunto le fibre della carta, che asciuga, come notate, molto più velocemente, quindi un tipo di carta che può essere magari più adatta, appunto, come dicevi prima, a lavori più veloci, a sketch, soprattutto se si lavora all'aperto.
Yes, it's saying that this paper dries in a faster way, so it could be used for sketches or for works that you do outdoor in order to make something fast.
Che chiaramente poi anche nella resa delle macchie a secco è leggermente diversa dalle carte che abbiamo visto in precedenza.
So you have a different effect on the wet and dry brush strokes, but at the end is a reflection of the paper by itself and the felt that you use. That is completely different from the others that we have seen before.
Che comunque però restituisce poi anche l'intensità del colore degli scuri massimi che abbiamo visto nei passaggi precedenti, quindi una differenza fondamentalmente sui tempi di asciugatura.
So the biggest difference is on the time that you need to dry the paint on the paper. That's the biggest difference, and of course you can verify by yourself if you use a lot of water, is the buckling of the paper that's very different compared to the other papers. That's given by the fact that the production machine is completely different, and that reflects on the quality of the paper. You can just a short, quick, veloce pennellata sulla torsion.
Sulla torsion, certo.
Yeah, just to show to you how the same paper made on the same machine, but without a felt, without a different way. That's my curiosity. So how it reflects on the effects. So it seems closer to a smooth paper, let's say, but it should allow to have different effects due to the absorption of the brush strokes and the color and the water, due to the uneven formation of the inner part of the of the fibers internally in the sheet.
Anche qua chiaramente gli effetti poi di asciugatura e di movimento del colore sono completamente differenti in base al tipo di produzione, al tipo di carta. Non avete visto nulla fino a qua?
No. The last part of the effect.
Okay.
So, okay, I think now, because I want to steal some more time to Keiko after us to make the demo, we can see the last video in order to show how this paper is produced, and I will underline, it's 3 minutes, I will underline the differences of the Foldrini-made papers compared to the mold-made papers. So showing where the differences happen and how it reflects on the paper.
Vai.
Possiamo partire con l'ultimo video. Grazie. So, no, where is the last video? I know that you were hoping that it was finished, just to show how this paper is produced. Sorry, you have to wait 3 minutes more, but it will be very quick, very fast. So the production of the preparation of the pulp is the same. Now the blend is different. We have more wood pulp and 20-25% of cotton. And you will see that at the beginning there is a head box. There is no cylinder mold. So you see the web of pulp comes out on this table, that is wire cloth. And so this is used for draining out the water. And you can see the speed is higher. Here you have the grain direction. So the fibers are following the machine direction. So they are disposing all in the same direction. That reflects in the buckling of the paper that you don't have in the mold cylinder made papers. After that, you have the wet presses where we take out the water. So we squeeze the paper gently in order to get out the water. This is the dandy roll if you want to create a watermark on the paper that's used for some drawing papers that we have in Italy. And in this case, the watermark is created moving the fibers. It's not created when you have the paper creation. The wet presses take out the water and can give, as the mold cylinder machine, the surface grain. So this is exactly the same that you have in the mold-made cylinder machine. And now you have the other big difference. So it's the surface sizing arriving after the drying section that is done exactly the same way with heated cylinders in the machine. So now you will see that the surface sizing, due to the speed of the machine, is not tab sizing, it's called side press. It means that you have the glue coming out on the two sides of the paper. There are rolls that are drums very close. So like a small pond of sizing is created. The paper very dry, passing in between, is absorbing the surface sizing, but for a short while. So the bath, let's say, it's shorter and the speed is higher, so the sizing is good, but it cannot be the same quality of the size that you have in the mold cylinder machines. So that makes the difference. These are the two biggest differences that make mold-made cylinder papers more prestigious compared to Foldrini-made papers, but of course you are answering to different needs. Now it's over, so now you can clap. Davide, most. Thank you. I will leave the stage to Keiko. That will be, for sure, amazing and more exciting than me. So, not Davide, you're so exciting. That's the reason why I'm talking to you, because you don't understand. So.
Qualcosa lo capisco.
Thank you.
Grazie.
officially thank you, Giuseppe and Davide, for being with us.